Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Solidarity Friday. It's Joe Moore, Kyle Buller, Michelle and David not joining us this week. Hopefully back soon. So this is a new platform we're recording on, so just getting used to the look and feel. So hope you all are doing great. And on this episode, we're going to get into some really interesting things. Kyle and I have some ideas how greater world events are related to some of our kind of niche events and discussions in the space. Before we get started, just to let everybody know, we are we were really happy. We kicked off the Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists just yesterday. We're recording this on Wednesday, so on Tuesday, our time, the Australia cohort kicked off with Dr. Alana Roy, Melissa Warner, and Diego Pinzon. And we're really excited about it. So I hope that goes great, and I hope we can do more. And starting in September 23, we kick off our next 8-week round of more appropriate hours for North America and Europe, though plenty of Australians join those as well. So check it out if you want to. psychedelicEducationCenter.com or psychedelicstoday.com will get you there. Kyle, anything else you want to
add? Nope. I think that's good. Yeah, if you guys haven't subscribed, obviously subscribe. That helps us out a whole bunch. And if you want to leave a monthly donation, check us out on Patreon too. That helps us out. Keeps the light on.
Yeah, totally. So thank you all for being patrons out there. It really does help. Really, really does. So, all right. First thing I want to chat about is a bit of good news, what I consider good news. Some might think it's the end of the world, but our friends at Numinus have received a license to have a clinical trial on MDMA for PTSD. They're looking at a 20-person cohort. It's a Vancouver-based company, and they got approval from Health Canada, which is, I think, roughly like their FDA, I believe. And I just really excited to see another group doing the research. Here's a quote from the CEO of Numinus, Peyton Nyquist. We are thrilled that Health Canada has issued its no objection letter allowing this important study to proceed, and in doing so, potentially advance Canada towards a legal, regulated system for MDMA-assisted therapy. And this is quite similar to what MAPS is up to, and I'm just really excited for it. I would love to understand, what does their protocol look like, and what indications are they actually going at? Go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like it's in collaboration with MAPS, so I'm sure it's probably MAPS protocol, and I guess it is for PTSD, clinical use trial for PTSD.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome. I'm just excited to learn more, and it's great that MAPS is helping. And I wonder if there's going to be more of this kind of nonprofit, for-profit partnerships going on in the future. Like if MAPS raised enough money, or with the right partnerships with pharma groups, could we accelerate the inclusion of this stuff at this really strange point in history? So I don't know. I just really, really love that it's happening, and I'd love to see that Canada keeps doing great stuff like this.
It's just exciting to see the work spread, and another company is taking this on. And I forget, have you had somebody on Numinus on? I know we have Dr. Devin Christie coming up pretty soon on the podcast, maybe within a few weeks, to talk about chronic pain and possible treatment with MDMA. Just kind of exploring the theoretical aspects there. But yeah, she's part of Numinus as well. I forget, did you have anybody else from Numinus on in the past?
I believe I've communicated with them, but I don't believe we've had anybody from there on yet. From what I recall, like some of these groups I get turned into a total fanboy for. I see what they're up to, I see how novel it is, and I just immediately say, oh, revolutionary, in a really positive way. This is amazing. I can't help myself. And other times I'm like, yeah, whatever, like not really that interesting. But Numinus isn't one of those whatevers. So I hope to learn more about what they are up to, and hopefully we can share it.
Yeah.
And I guess another fun and positive note is that Psychedelics Today has formed a little bit of a partnership with Fruiting Bodies Collective.
It's very exciting.
Ilan and Rebecca Martinez up there, and they're doing a really cool thing in Oregon, developing BIPOC and queer specific psychedelic training for facilitators to be able to facilitate in Oregon. So really excited about their work. Equity, inclusion, all this fun stuff is top of mind for them, and I just hope it helps scale access and gets people the help they need. And I expect it will. I'm really hopeful for Oregon.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to learn more about their work at Fruiting Bodies, or maybe a little bit about their program, I think they mentioned it on our podcast, so you can go back into the archive there and check out that episode with Rebecca Ilan from Fruiting Bodies to learn more about the work that they're doing on the ground in Oregon. Very exciting. I'm excited about this partnership and relationship that we're building with them. So.
Yeah, Rebecca's done great work on our blog too. She's written a number of articles. They've all been fantastic. So check out Rebecca's work, psychedelicstoday.com/blog, or you can find your way to the blog, I'm sure, people. Cool. All right, and overall, I'm just excited to see what happens in Oregon. It's getting hot. We're coming up a year in just a few more months. I think October of next year is when this stuff might start kicking in, and we've got a lot of things to understand about what they're doing. So what are the requirements? Is there going to be... I kicked up some dust on this on the Facebook group. I don't know if you saw that. Should there be rules? It was hot. I probably shouldn't have put it, but should there be rules about therapists facilitators and clients not having sex with each other? And in session, that's kind of a no-brainer. But I think the more complicated question that really needs to be worked out is, how long do we wait until after? These people are not therapists. They don't have licenses, right? It's not medicine as such. Like, if you called it medicine, the FDA might get a little pissed and start to intervene. But, I think there should be a pretty decent embargo period on a sexual relationship between client and sitter. I don't know what the number is. 2 weeks seems too short.
Yeah. I know for the counseling field, we have in our ethics 5 years, I believe it is, for any sort of romantic relationship with a client or anything like that. So yeah. No kind of professional relationship for over 5 years.
Professional or romantic relationship.
I mean, if you were to start a romantic relationship, you'd have to have 5 years in between the termination of that professional relationship and the start of that other sort of relationship, romantic, sexual.
Right on. Yeah, it's a tough one. I think consent, again, is complicated. We don't really understand informed consent around psychedelics yet. If someone says they do, they might be full of baloney. Like, some of these groups actually, what did I hear? They manually will walk somebody through a 16-page informed consent document. And that's pretty good. That's probably about right, honestly. But it's kind of obnoxious to think that we need to do 16 pages of informed consent manually like that and take hours. But then, there's stuff that's not covered. What's going to happen to your primary love relationship in 2 months? Like, are you going to see it in a totally different light and then need tens of thousands of dollars for a divorce? Or is it going to put you in a really stressful situation where you can't be near your kids? Like, these are things that can happen after psychedelic sessions. And to pretend they don't exist is not great. Like, we should be accepting these things as possible complicating factors. And what else could come downstream, right? Nightmares, spontaneous out-of-body experiences. There's all sorts of free secondary stuff that we don't really have designed yet. We need to see this at scale, I think, before we can really pin it all down.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we keep bringing up, right? Like, what happens when this goes to scale? What don't we know? You know, we're going to learn so much, probably pretty quickly as this unfolds, the things that we don't know.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, I don't know, I don't want to go too far down that track, but yeah, just we need to, because this is a governmental situation that a government could shut down if there was enough bad acting, I think we need kind of stringent rules on this. I hate to say it, and I hate to feel kind of repressive on sexual stuff, but I think there's some need for caution here around psychedelics and sex. We've run into a number of people, Kyle, and you know, I've almost battled a few of them, where they're really interested in orgasm during medicine sessions, and while theoretically that's really interesting, and I would love to know more, I just don't think we are at a cultural point where that's going to help us as a movement as a whole. Might help individuals here and there, but there's also consent issues involved. Like I've heard of some really non-consensual stuff going down, and this was the excuse. And we've talked about it in master classes and elsewhere. Yeah, so I don't know. It's a little weird. I would just say I urge caution. And if you're doing this stuff, please try your best to get as much consent as possible, and please try to be as discreet as possible.
What were some of those comments on the Facebook group? Like, what type of responses?
Somebody said, like, I think, you know, I phrased it poorly in that some of it was, I really meant long-term sexual relationships when it probably read as sex in sessions.
Right.
Sex in sessions, people were saying this should be qualified as rape, and we don't need new rules because it's already defined as rape. It's like, yeah, kind of, not really though, dude. Like, that's rape. Rape has different criteria than sex between these people. So a little bit too much idealism, I think, is what I was seeing here and there. A lot of people were saying, yes, of course, this shouldn't, why do we even have to ask this? But a lot of people always said, yeah, you know, of course we have to ask. This is a really weird problem. And worth bringing.
Yeah, I mean, it happens quite often, right? And I think just even thinking about like retreat centers or the psilocybin service centers, if people are going there, they make those like really deep connections. People are being seen on levels that maybe you've never been seen or heard before. And these really deep, sometimes authentic connections happen during these sessions or ceremonies. And how do you navigate that? You know, it feels very different at times when I'm guessing more of you, maybe as a facilitator or therapist, shows up in the room versus, I guess, thinking about like some of those other boundaries that sometimes are put up a little bit more in those settings. But yeah, like what happens when more of the individual starts to show up, and you know the transference, countertransference stuff starts to happen. People are making connections, yeah, and I mean, I think it happens quite often, right? And how do you navigate that moving forward? I've been hosting some interviews with Veronica Gold from Polaris around ketamine and trauma. And I find it really interesting that touch keeps coming up in some of the conversations. And one of our last interviews that we just did yesterday, it was all based on touch and therapeutic touch within sessions. And, you know, for Joe and I think that's really important. I mean, coming from the breathwork background, it's like a no-brainer to think how important touch and body work is for psychedelic sessions. But how do we do that skillfully with integrity, and also with some boundaries there, so there's no harm being done? And the question is, if you are, I guess, in that position of power, what's your intention for touching or doing any sort of body work? Do you feel that it would be beneficial, or is the person actually asking for it and maybe needing it, right? So I think it's really important to get some sort of training around a lot of these issues, Probably some of this stuff is outside of the psychedelic education. You're going to find that in other sort of communities and training, but
I think we're going to try to include that in ours, right? Like, this is a big deal.
Definitely.
And it's been, we know of people that refuse to do psychotherapy in the United States because you can't touch your clients. Therapeutic touch is so valuable. But at the same time, it's a slippery slope. I was chatting with a friend of the show the other day, Kyle, and he was saying something along the lines of, I was kind of ranting about all of sexual misconduct, and he's like, we should have sexuality out of it, like we shouldn't be doing that, but is it possible to have a psychedelic session without sexual energy coming up? And I think his point was no, you can't, and it's kind of just something that you have to deal with. And are you mature enough to be able to have that restraint in session? A lot of people aren't.
I
certainly felt plenty of that. Yeah, man, totally. It's really awkward in breathwork and psychedelic.
Breathwork session. Yeah.
Totally. Breathwork, psychedelic sessions, festivals, concerts, like the works. Like, it's everywhere. As soon as people are amplified, sexuality is amplified, and it can throw a big wrench in things. And Daniel McQueen has shared a number of stories about bad stuff popping up in Boulder, just groups and MDMA and drugs, and lines and ethics get blurred. And ethics might not be the right term, because that's interpersonal, not professional. And it's a whole ball of wax when we start saying ethics. So we'll make people hold out for the book on that one. Psychedelic philosophy book. Kyle and I might be included in. More on that later.
Yeah, I don't know when it's going to be released, but yeah, dropping little hints right now.
But yeah, it's a really big situation. Thankfully, our context is often in groups, so we have amazing group accountability. Everybody sees everybody, and everybody knows what we expect from each other. In some of these newer movements, new age gurus, fitness guys that sell weight bells and coffee cups, like, it's hard to know what them as newcomers-ish to the scene are going to bring. They're going to bring their own kind of style, which is it's probably fine, but we should watch it to make sure not too much sexuality comes into this particular space. And if people are going to go that way, you have to have a lot of conversations about rules and consent and what you're actually trying to do and all this other wild stuff. There are sex cults you can model your stuff after if you want to go that way. There are plenty of sex parties you can look at their consent policies and all this kind of stuff. You want to learn from that and go that way. My advice: go slow, start really small. Only do it if you think it's essential and really helpful. Please don't do it just because you think it might help. Have a lot of certainty, please, before you go. And go experiment with your own personal romantic partner before you bring this into strangers. You need to do a lot of your own stuff before you bring this to others. And perhaps wait 5 years to learn as much as you can about polyvagal theory, depth psychology, etc. And maybe you'll be more informed. Tantra and Tai Chi, Qigong, etc. They'll all inform how you approach this stuff. And hopefully in the safest way possible, if you go that way. Again, I don't think people should go that way right now because I think it's politically dangerous. But if you do, be careful.
Yeah,
I guess like death, or you got some more.
Yeah. I guess. Well, I'm just curious. Why did that question initially come up for you? I guess as things are getting established in Oregon, were you thinking about what were some
it was an active debate in Oregon.
It was. Okay.
Yeah, so they actually debated it, and some people are saying no, we shouldn't have rules around this. And as soon as someone says no, you shouldn't have rules around sexual ethics. Between facilitators and customers, I guess, makes me go a little on edge. I'm like, what are you doing here? And some of the names involved in the Oregon project make me question what's going on and what are actual intentions. And is somebody trying to sabotage? I'm a paranoid thinker, of course, very admittedly paranoid. So I'm like, what angle does this person have, and what are they trying to do? And I'm not even from like Philly or Jersey, and I'm wondering what people have for an angle, right? Like that's kind of just natural in Philly, probably parts of Jersey. But it's like, what
do you want from me
here? Yeah, what are you doing? Like, why'd you say hi? Fuck off! Like trying to steal? Yeah. So like this kind of gut, instinctive reaction is just, I know people are doing weird stuff, and how weird do we want Oregon to get? It's up to the Oregonians, but the Oregonians have elected a lot of non-Oregonians to be helping them figure it out. Yeah, it's a weird one. I can actually, I think, point out, no, I'm having so much software issues. So here's how I phrased it. I posted this on July 23 in the group. Here's how I phrased it. Should Oregon have rules in place around facilitators having sex with clients? So vague, so clearly I didn't specify timeline. I tend to think people are very impressionable and more susceptible to coercion after a psychedelic session. So there I'm implying after the session. Customers would benefit from protection on this front. What do you think? So I kind of immediately went to like Hannibal Lecter. I'm like, this is the kind of stuff that Hannibal Lecter would love to get involved in. Just like preying on clients and, I'm going to kill you, but I'm going to be in your will. I like to go to worst case scenario for whatever reason. Doesn't necessarily make me feel good. It's just a thought experiment.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that come up around this too. One is, I think, Laura Northrup, we kind of talked about just group work in general and with psychedelics and, the shadow aspect of that, of, very kind of vulnerable people coming with a lot of trauma and a lot of healing. And then you have the, people that are coming because it's like, really, they can prey on that, right? And so there's that like power dynamic that unfolds, and things do happen. I mean, this is why we're having this conversation. This stuff happens all the time. And then the other thing that kind of just came up in my head was a Clubhouse room I was in months ago. Man, I haven't been on Clubhouse in months. This is a while ago, but the room was on how to spot a narcissistic facilitator. And one of the experts in there was suggesting, like, there's this dynamic that unfolds with like the narcissist and people that may identify as empathetic or an empath. And like the narcissist loves to be in those positions because of the manipulation, the power, and who gets really drawn to these fields, right? Sometimes it does feel very sexy. It feels like there's a lot of power involved. And as a facilitator, I think it's really important for you to really think about that, your power and your privilege in these spaces, and why are people coming to these sessions or trying to seek out these services? People are looking for healing, and is it ethical to like overstep that boundary because you think that it might be really good for the person's healing? I don't know. I question that, right? I mean, granted, there are people that may find healing in that, and if there's consent and if that's what they're looking for and they want to go down that path, like I don't want to judge anybody's experience with that, but these are prime conditions for people to be abused in and taken advantage of, and so I think it's just important to raise that.
We've heard of plenty of really ugly situations out there involving well-regarded people in the space, making a lot of missteps, and it's really troubling. Some people have to go to the hospital after, sometimes for multiple years, and it's because of consent and betrayal, largely, I think. When the person you trust the most in the world stabs you in the back or does something non-consensual, what does that do to you, especially when you're in these kind of drug-altered states? There's a lot to consider here, folks. Hate to be a downer, but I guess that's what I like doing, is being a downer, just so we know that we're being really careful building the way forward.
Well, it's like the shadow aspects, right? It's like just kind of putting light on these aspects that aren't really talked about very often.
Yeah. Cool. I think on to the next. Didn't tell you about this one, Kyle. I'm sneaking it in.
Cool.
I was told recently that I've been going really hard on Michael Pollan. I just finished Michael Pollan's new book. This is Your Mind on Plants.
How was it?
It's awesome. Covers opium, coffee, and mescaline. And always been fascinated by opium. Wildly addicted to caffeine, so I love coffee. And then I've only had some mescaline derivatives like 2CB and some alternatives. I've never consumed straight mescaline or San Pedro or peyote, so it was really interesting to see his path. I think he did a really good job. I think I want to run a book club on this, so more soon, because it seems like he's softening on the points that we have all been critical of him on. Of course, I still have issues with his presentation and stuff, but I think overall it's a really great book, worth reading.
What really stood out for you?
Well, there are 3 different series. The opium one he essentially wrote in the 90s.
Oh, okay.
And statute of limitations kind of passed, so he's able to publish it with some edits. He's such a good storyteller. Like, this is, like, I've been in love with his writings far before, since he was involved in psychedelics. His other books are lovely and really compelling stories about why we need to care about certain things, or arguing that we should care about certain things. So, the opium one, opium's just a beautiful history. It's like a beautiful plant, beautiful history. Poppies are wonderful. If anybody hasn't smoked opium, sorry. Carl Hart literally claims his favorite drug is heroin. And he's able to hold off till he has the most pure heroin ever. I find that fascinating. And one of Carl Hart's arguments is the states reported on opium are often very similar to what we report in psychedelic stories. And it was a ceremonial, sacramental plant for many traditions. And, like, how essential are these opioids? Like, I think they're wildly essential. They're really undervalued right now. And the way we talk about it, it's the devil. Nobody should ever do opioids. And it's like, no. Like, if I'm in surgery, I want opioids. If I had surgery, I want opioids later. If I had a big accident, probably want some opioids for a couple days. Yes, I know for sure that, acetaminophen, ibuprofen combo performs better often in terms of pain reduction, but still I'm not going to write off that whole category of drugs. The dynamics around addiction and demonization there are important. There's a lot of really cool stuff Pollan calls out about government misinformation around poppies. Like going so far as you can buy this stuff in flower shops, dried poppies at flower shops and like arts and craft stores, and get some traction, put it that way. And then the coffee one, it's a lovely story. It's essentially this audiobook he put out early in mid 2020, maybe, just caffeine. It's essentially that with a little bit of expansion on some categories. Beautiful history. Such a revolutionary molecule. Like, we wouldn't have had like the French Enlightenment, like the Enlightenment period in Europe without it. A lot of revolutions worldwide can be attributed to caffeine and clear thinking. Like democracy in a lot of ways can be attributed to caffeine. It's a really interesting concept, and I loved it. He does this really cool thing where it's like, it's fucked up how addicted you are, right? But I'm still addicted. And he, like, for his book, what I love about the caffeine story is I'm probably going to get this wrong. It's either Charlie Grob or Roland Griffiths did a ton of caffeine research, and they were cited a bunch in the book, which is neat. And they talked about, okay, one of them had a really big caffeine issue and like started chewing on coffee beans just to get the caffeine they needed because they're in a hurry or power's out or something, and they're like, I think this is fucked up and I need to do some research here. And like, maybe I need to kick this habit. And what's going on? Michael Pollan documents his own kind of abstinence period and then jumping back in. It's typical, right? Like,
yeah, I haven't had coffee since I got sick a few weeks ago. My body like hasn't been craving it. I've been drinking black tea that has caffeine in it, but it's been, I've been thinking about it today. Like, there was part of me that was like really craving. I was like, I could go for a cup of coffee, but there's something in my body that just still doesn't want it for some reason. I guess I don't know. I just am orienting towards tea a little bit more now. But I mean, I love coffee. Like, I need to start my day off with it, and it's been really interesting that my body's not wanting it right now. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, I really want the taste of coffee. It's so strange.
The last best bit of trivia from it was coffee and tea are the primary source of antioxidants in the American diet. It's like, that's kind of horrifying, but good to know, I guess. And then the mescaline one, he did a really sensitive take, I think, on the cultural issues around peyote.
Oh, good.
Mescaline, the history of mescaline in the West, the indigenous history a little bit. Of course, like Michael Pollan's he's not a real historian. He's more of like a journalist storyteller, kind of gonzo style, participatory journalism. And Mike J probably did a better history of mescaline, because this is a small section of a small book. So it's not meant to be complete, right? Like, complete's probably 700 pages, and even Mike J was probably only 300 something. So it was a great story. I loved it. It is compelling. It's a really interesting compound. It's just crazy we haven't done more research in it. I understand, like, you need this much LSD and you need this much mescaline, but still we should be doing that research. I'm happy some pharma groups are digging in, but the logic some pharma groups used is, well, we're doing it because it's the only one left. We're researching this molecule. It's like, that's a ridiculous answer. Like, there's so many good reasons to be looking at it. And like the Sasha Shulgin stuff, like 2CB, fantastic, comes from phenethylamines, comes from mescaline. It's a really fucking cool drug. Anyway, that's enough on that one. I kind of want to transition over to this kind of mistrust. Or actually, before we do that, Kyle, let's just do the Australia one.
Cool.
I think this organization is called Psychae, 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 something like that.
Psychae, yeah.
It's a new Australian group looking really internationally in scope. I think they're getting a lot of participation from folks like David Nutt, other leaders in the psychedelic space. And what is this organization? Is it largely a research organization, Kyle?
Yeah, it sounds like they want to do some collaboration with some research. So, yeah, on the website here, the Psychae Institute, a collaboration between researchers from leading world universities, plans to advance clinical studies of psychedelics such as psilocybin, MDMA, and then DMT as well. And the news, they just launched, and then they launched with some news that they just were funded with $40 million from an American biotech company. But sounds
they
like
didn't name who it was, right?
Yeah, they wanted to keep that a little private due to some strategy and whatnot. But they're saying it looks like they want to be focusing on DMT, which would be a first for Australia and second for the world. So I'm curious to hear more about what they're looking for, and that I'm guessing it's within a clinical scope and not just doing just regular kind of research on how it affects the brain or the body. But yeah, just exciting to see another organization emerge in that part of the world, and just starting to contribute and hopefully pushing policy change and just getting the research out there in that part of the world.
All right, I just had a funny transition for us.
Cool.
Did Christianity ever have something like kosher rules or halal rules around cleanliness of food? You know what I'm saying? Why is this idea of things being pure and impure still in our culture so much? Just a question. I don't have any answers. And this is a transition into our conversation around psychedelic pharma and mistrust, generally speaking, that we see in the community. And community is even the right word. So how do we go here? So there's a lot of anger and a lot of mistrust towards many of these psychedelic companies popping up right now, largely the pharma, biotech ones that are manufacturing and hope to get approval by regulatory agencies. And I guess there's a lot of reasons why there's mistrust.
Yeah.
I think public opinion on pharma is it's really a tough situation. Like, we don't really celebrate pharma too much anymore. I think we used to, maybe in the early 2000s and the 90s, when there was like regularly new chemo drugs coming out, regularly new drugs coming out for everything. It's really just fascinating that we finally had treatments for stuff that we just never had treatments for before.
Yeah.
And drugs are a lot cheaper than putting somebody in a really expensive machine, right? Like, if you could put somebody in a dialysis machine or give them drugs, you'd probably rather give them drugs as opposed to like having them go to a dialysis clinic every day, you know?
Right.
So it's, less labor intensive. It's less of a burden on the individual, hopefully. Not exactly a one-to-one there. But things like the negative press around SSRIs, opioids, etc. Like, Purdue Pharma clearly did a lot of wrong, but opioids aren't necessarily a bad drug, right? Like, fentanyl is actually kind of a miracle drug. While lethal as shit, it's an amazing drug in clinical practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so how do we relate this kind of like demonization of certain compounds in a whole industry? Like, of course, pharma's done some scumbag stuff, totally. But haven't they done a lot of good? I think I was recording with somebody the other day, and I said, what has saved more lives, drugs or sacraments? I think the answer is clearly drugs.
Mm.
If we want to call a polio vaccine drugs,
Right.
if we want to call like antibiotics drugs, right? Definition of drugs is a whole complicated thing. I'm told Psychedelic Press has some work on that, and I need to dig in because I have a hard time with phrasing. I get caught on words regularly just because is that right? Plant medicine? What? You've seen me have these troubles. But what is it, and why? What's going on here in pharma? Like, we can look at the vaccine as a clear example. I want to stop talking about the vaccine eventually, but why do people so distrust these groups who have delivered a lot of life-saving meds to people? Why do we just distrust them and the FDA so much?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know if it's just been tied with, some of the abuse that's happened. I mean, obviously, we've highlighted just medical abuse in general and these systemic abuses that happen to certain communities and people over decades, and that starts to definitely breed mistrust, right? Also, I think, like, when you equate, these drugs and medical interventions to massive amounts of money, I think people get skeptical and start to question, is there a cure, or are you just pushing something to continue to keep me on to make money? And I think that's a valid question to be asking at times, of like, what's the agenda here with some of these drug manufacturers? And I know, like, I've definitely been down the route, like, I've mentioned before, like, kind of skeptical of certain vaccines just because, like, not having a spleen, I'm always getting injected with things. And there's part of me that needed to go through some of that bodily autonomy of, like, going through surgery, feeling like I didn't have any autonomy over that. I mean, it's a very kind of traumatic experience. Like, I've worked through a lot of it, but it's like an interesting thing to have something traumatic happen to you and not have any sort of agency over the experience. You're just at the hands of the doctors, which I'm thankful of. I wouldn't be here if that was the case. But then also kind of questioning, like, what are all these things that they're prescribing me all the time? It's like anytime I would go to the doctor for something, it was always like, we'll give you an antibiotic, or we want to give you this. And, I'm just left scratching my head going, like, is that the proper diagnosis? Like, should I be taking that? And, not too much like, explanation happening at times. And, it just kind of left me sitting there going, like, what's going on here? Is this just all for profit? Are they just being pushed by pharma companies to push some of these medications from time to time? Even though there's good intention there, right? Like they're making a diagnosis and they think a drug is going to be helpful, and so from that perspective, it's a good thing. But I think on the other side, when people are thinking about like bodily autonomy and just agency over their own healing, it can be threatened. And I'm just speaking from my own experience here, kind of going through my own things with the medical system. And I don't know what your experience has been like over the years. I know you've been kind of in and out of medical stuff with different surgeries, and has there been any mistrust within you, I guess, over
Absolutely.
the years?
Yeah. So I'll start with some snark and then I'll work my way back. What do you call a doctor that finished last in class?
A doctor.
Right. So like some doctors are fucking amazing. Some doctors aren't. I think by and large, doctors didn't try to become a doctor to hurt you.
No.
Doctors largely want to become doctors to help people. And we've got to start at the baseline there. If you don't believe that, maybe check that out. Like, why do you think doctors wanted to become doctors to hurt people? So ask some really serious, questions of yourself. And I've been in and out of the hospital and with doctors for the last 7 years like crazy. It's horrible. I've had a lot of problems. Largely, I trust the doctors. When it's an acute, injury, it's kind of straightforward. Like, I went to the ICU with a kidney laceration. That was pretty straightforward. Spent a few days in there. They said, well, if you start bleeding too much, we're going to lose your kidney, and you need to be at the ICU. I was like, okay, I'll stay in the ICU in case you need to remove my kidney. All right, or stitch it up or whatever it is. And I didn't question that shit one bit. I did refuse opioids like a dummy. I was in horrific pain. Allie shows up, my girlfriend. She's like, you didn't take any pain meds for this? You've been peeing blood and a lot of pain. I was like, yeah, I'm tough. It's fine. She's like, just do it, you idiot. I was like, fine. And I was like, oh God, that helps a lot. So really helpful tools. And then, but going in to my local physician saying just a checkup, told him I ate edibles to go to sleep, cannabis edibles to go to sleep. He said, oh, we don't like that here. You probably should stop that right away. There's just no long-term data on cannabis yet. So we want you to take valerian and melatonin. And that just blew up my trust for this particular PA here that I was going to. And it's like, no, you've got no... And I feel bad for these people, right? They're essentially service providers. In our current era, we don't want to say that I'm a customer to them because it feels not polite or something. But I don't give a shit. Why am I waiting 30 minutes while this guy's on, why do I have to wait 30 minutes every time I go to this physician or dentist or whatever? It makes no sense. I made an appointment. You guys can't keep your appointments. I see these things as businesses because in our current era, most medicine is delivered as a business. Mm-hmm. Perhaps it's a Catholic nonprofit that I'm going to, which have issues with because they tell women they can't birth control. Unless you have cramps, you have to lie to the doctor to get what you want, which William Burroughs talked about that for ages ago. This is how you score off the doctors. You have to lie to them these ways. And William Burroughs really developed that. And, I've never really had success getting what I want from doctors that way. That's not the point of doctors, right? You go there to get treated, hopefully, for what you report to them. And that's allopathic medicine, right? It's different approaches in osteopathy, naturopathy, etc. I really like osteopaths, by the way. DOs are really fucking cool. But, standard allopathic MDs, this is the problem, this is how you fix the problem, hopefully. But you have to diagnose it first. And misdiagnosis is a big deal. We're going through that right now with the COVID long hauler stuff that we're dealing with in my household, and it's really ugly. How do you get a diagnosis for something that there's barely any data for? There's no disability. Doctors tell you have a migraine, so take these migraine meds when you've been a lifelong migraine sufferer and none of the symptoms match up, and the neurologist doesn't want to hear it. And they're like, here's your meds. See you in 6 months. Good luck. What kind of treatment is that? And they're dealing with constraint on resources. We have a real shortage of medical professionals, and insurance companies want to just crank out a lot of visits, so their rules they're a little limited by rules. So it's a multifactorial problem. It's not a straight situation. And
I think
do
a
they
lot
even
of
have time to
around
critically
the
think?
systems, right?
Totally.
The education, just the system in general. It's like I think I know a lot of great people that have gotten into medicine or therapy or whatever, and just feeling so constricted by the systems that they're placed in, and almost like not being able to operate how they would see fit at times, or like what would be in the client's best interest, because they're kind of constrained by certain things. So I think that's also something that we have to look at, right? And where maybe some of that mistrust happens. It's a lot of the systemic parts of all these issues. And I think over decades or just years of feeling that that can really start to emerge.
So what does the FDA tell us we should eat? What does science in 2021 tell us we should eat? What are doctors telling their clients, patients, how to eat? Is it based on science, industry manipulated science from 20, 30, 40 years ago, or is it based on 2021 data? When doctors are suggesting Mediterranean diet, that's based on data. When they're suggesting FDA approved, food pyramid stuff, that's just an industry scam, and it's pretty well documented. And so these are problems when your profession has been manipulated more than once by industry. There's going to be reason why people don't want to believe you. Again, I'm not saying Mediterranean diet's optimal. I'm just saying it's a little bit more modern in terms of what doctors are telling people. The other one's a vegan one, like How Not to Diet or How Not to Die. Like that guy's vegan book. Like some decent data there. At least it's based on recent data. Might not agree with it, but it's at least there. And Fauci. Let's talk Fauci and the mask thing for a minute. Early on in the pandemic, Fauci, I believe, made some statements around normal non-healthcare workers not needing to wear masks. This was not accurate. He knew it. The intention, as far as I can tell, was to make sure that healthcare workers had enough. If we were losing and healthcare workers were dying like crazy early in this pandemic, this would have been way worse. So there was real intention and real reason to lie. So in a way, it's a white lie. But it's like, how do you run an empire with, 270 million people and, tell the truth all the time? You can't. It's like saying the presidents always tell the truth. No, they don't. Of course they don't. And we know that. And why is Fauci any different? Fauci is an arm of this empire trying to keep as many people, if we want to get really practical, keeping as many people working as possible. And, that's kind of what this weird empire is. It's industry. We're making money from keeping people employed, keeping unemployment low, and GDP up. And that's kind of it's a few figures. And of course, we want to keep as many people well as possible, because, we don't want tragic deaths from lack of access to hospitals. We already have very few hospitals, and beds were filling up like crazy. So you have to kind of manipulate the story to get what you want. Numbers lie. Remember when the Johnson & Johnson vaccine got pulled briefly?
Yeah.
I think it was
blood clotting, right?
Somewhere around 2 to 7 blood clots were reported, and I believe it was pulled for politics. This is well within the realm of what's to be expected naturally in that kind of a population size. And we saw, I think that was a $2 to $3 million individual sample size with 1 to 7 or 2 to 7 blood clots, and it was pulled. It's that was a political play. It's not saying this is unsafe. It's saying, no, we're doing politics here to make you feel safe, so you're going to keep taking these things. And what story are we getting from Compass? Or Atai, right? Like, trust us, we're doing science very rigorously. We're going to make this stuff prescribable really soon. And it's going to help millions of people. That's their story, right? Like the public one. And we're going to bring new molecules through and have some really great breakthroughs. So we have new drugs to do even better with, less of a burden, meaning the trip. And we're going to have great results and have people back in culture. But, the cynics, the ones that aren't trustful, say once they have all that money, aren't they, which they already have crazy amounts of money, those people, are they going to start working against all of the other businesses in the space? Or are they going to start working against drug policy reform, decriminalize nature, etc., and Drug Policy Alliance and more? And I think the answer is we don't know. Right? Like, there was that letter leaked from Atai a while back saying we've got all this IP locked down such that competition isn't even possible. I read Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. Everybody complains about Peter Thiel but doesn't read his book. You should read his book if you don't like him. From 0 to 1. It's a really interesting book. It says he doesn't want to invest in things that aren't monopolies, aren't like de facto monopolies. Psychedelics, done appropriately, could be that. Either orders of magnitude cheaper or orders of magnitude better is like the function he follows. And this, overall MDMA-assisted psychotherapy or whatever his portfolio of businesses is doing is orders of magnitude better and cheaper. Both. Kind of hits both criteria from what we've been doing. If we look at total lifetime cost, right? To insurance or the individual themselves too.
Yeah.
And I saw this argument recently, Kyle. Somebody was yelling about vaccines. Somebody I really like, honestly, yelling about vaccines, and it was like, but the government lied, ... and like a couple other things. How can we trust them? And how is this patriotic? It's like, well, like, you're trying to rule this huge empire, the most powerful country in the world, richest country in the world. Of course you're going to have to say stuff like this. To expect them to tell the truth all the time is you're living in fantasy land. Like, what does Ted Cruz get up to on the weekends, or Rick Santorum, or even like Cuomo? Who is that guy? Is he the governor of New York or something?
Yeah.
Good Lord. Good luck, dude. I don't... Just pull the cord. Yeah, legalize everything. Get out of there. It's a tough one. These people aren't living great lives either. Like, yes, they might have power and influence, but they're stressed as shit. Like, senators and congressmen, like, how horrible is that life for the most part? It's not a good one. Everything you say and do is recorded. You've got to, like, maximize your security protocols and don't say anything without talking to your team. Like, how horrible is that? And then your personal life gets leaked and you get told you're out.
Oh, man, I can't imagine, the amount of stress of something like that.
Faking I'm an evangelical Christian and, hanging out in weird scenes at night outside of the View, It's insane. It's not a great scene, but they do it. And I don't know. So I guess long and short, like, there's a lot of mistrust. Should we mistrust? And for what reasons? What's enough of a reason to justify that kind of mistrust? A lot of questions left to answer.
Yeah.
I don't know, like rules to evidence. Like this, if you study the judicial system a little bit, like what constitutes evidence? What's really good evidence? What's circumstantial evidence? There's always going to be cover-ups. And like, if the thing you're maddest about right now is COVID vaccines, you haven't been reading enough. There's so much more to be mad about. A little bit of history. You'll be furious. Yeah. And how does this inform our psychedelic revolution that we're working on? We need to figure out who's our friends and who aren't. Some people are, some people are not. Some organizations are and are not. Yeah, and not everybody needs the same mission, right? It's okay to have a different mission.
Yeah.
The world's pretty big.
Yeah. There's a lot of room for playing in different things, but yeah, I mean, this conversation, like when I think about it, it's just, I think it's important as, it is, psychedelics are going down the medical route, and yeah, we're just trying to tie these two things together around the distrust with the medical field in general, FDA or big pharma groups, because what happens?
And
when
we're white people.
Yeah,
let's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about indigenous black folks, like how horrified they are, or at least substantially more distrustful of the medical establishment at large.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean these are hard questions. Like I said, like I bounce back and forth between the good that some of these systems have done, and also the harm and abuse that they've done, and that's what creates that mistrust of like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if I trust like this company or this organization or system. Like, what are they going to do? Are they have this agenda and going to continue to promote like abuse and oppression? And on the flip side, it's like, well, what happens if these like organizations did bring healing to the masses, and it did create like a revolutionary change in the way that we view psychology and mental health, and we were able to have a lot more creative breakthroughs to solve problems, and it's like, I guess like weighing the the risks and benefits between it all. And yeah, it's hard to kind of tease apart and think about when there has been a lot of lies, a lot of mistrust, and a lot of harm. And it's like, it doesn't always feel like these entities are good or are friends or are in our favor. But also, have they been in the past to some degree? And I think we also have to look at that part and be like, well, yeah, I'm really thankful for Western medicine. I wouldn't be here. I always come back to something an ethnobotanist told me, that some of the best people that she's witnessed practiced like integrative medicine are some indigenous people that she studied with, because they really loved Western antibiotics, and they found them superior when some of their plant medicines didn't work. And so, maybe they didn't see or participate in a lot of the abuse or mistrust that has happened over the past few decades with these organizations and entities. And they're just seeing it at face value, going, oh, wow, there's medicine here, and this is better than my plant medicine. Yeah, we'll use it. This is far superior. And that really like stuck out at me, and saying, wow, like, there's some good here at times. Maybe we don't always see it, or we can't always feel it because of that mistrust and not just feeling scared. Like, what is the agenda here with some of these companies? They just want to come in and make like billions of dollars, and they don't give two shits about us. It's all about the money. Or are some of these companies actually really wanting to help? And it just takes massive amount of capital to do research and to produce these molecules or medicines to get out to the public and to create the systems that we need to properly support people moving forward. These are all questions that we have to ask and kind of tease apart and think about through a lot of different lenses.
Yeah, it makes me think of the Bronner decriminature MAPS thing that's been flaring up a little bit. What are intentions? Like you were mentioning, are you just here to make money and you don't care about us? And it's, what is us? Is it the pre-existing community? And how do you convince a big corporation that they should care about the pre-existing community if the community is not necessarily essential to their go-forward plan?
Right.
But and that's probably relevant to some of the bigger groups. Like, are we relevant to them at all, other than we helped set the groundwork for a lot of this stuff? We as a community at large. But MAPS, decriminature, Bronner's, SB 519. You've been following this a little bit. Like I've not been too up to speed on this, but I remember seeing DN's posts suggesting that MAPS doesn't support decriminalization, and like citing things that MAPS doesn't support decrim. But it's like, we have to give MAPS a little bit of a break. They are doing really incredible work. They're executing on a really important mission here, which is bringing MDMA to market and make it prescribable and help people with PTSD. MAPS isn't here to fight every fight that you think they need to fight. If and when MAPS starts fighting on the other side, which I don't think is going to happen, that's a different story. Decrim nature, I believe you need to be a little bit more polite and make more friends, and then we can have more productive dialogue around this stuff. I love that you're doing this work around decriminalizing some plants, not poppies, notably. I learned that in the Pollan book. Yeah, some of the pharmacopoeia is okay, not all of it. I find that fascinating. And is it true? So they allege that David Bronner and Peter Thiel are working together in this nonprofit to open up California to something like the Oregon model, probably a little bit more commercial. I haven't really been able to follow up on any of that and see if that's true, but that's kind of the accusations made in some of their releases recently. And then MAPS is somehow in the mix. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think so. Did you see Izzy Ismail Ali's, I think, lead counsel at MAPS's statement in front of the California?
I did. I watched it a few weeks ago, so I don't remember it in detail, but I did watch it.
Just awesome.
Yeah.
That's all. It's just awesome. Such amazing work.
And he should be on the show soon, right? And
might even be next week. Joining us for the Friday episode, which would be awesome. And we can dig into more of that and get more specifics around SB 519 because Izzy's been doing a lot of work there, and is very close to it. We can't get everything we want all the time. Decrim Nature had some lines about setting possession limits being just, this is when the police can arrest you. It's setting an arbitrary limit for when the police can arrest you. And when I looked at those possession limits, I'm like, that's pretty extreme. I think that's going to be fine. Though there are questions around, you remember how in some pot busts, cannabis busts, they'll actually weigh the soil and include that in the total.
Right.
Like, 500 pounds, but it was like 400 pounds of soil. We have 500-pound bust, just to make it sound bigger. Can they do that with psilocybin containing mushrooms in grows?
Possibly.
Are they going to weigh the substrate?
The substrate, the jars. I remember when I was interviewed for some news channel in Nashville years ago.
Yeah.
I think they I don't know if you saw that video, but they were talking about, like, they had a bust of LSD and they're like 5 pounds or 10, I forget what it was. But they just showed jars of, like, mycelium jars, and it's like, what? Like, it's so inaccurate, and, like, is that what the cops were charging them for? Like, these mycelium jars? Was it even LSD, or, the news channel just didn't, like, put up proper pictures of the bust or whatever? I don't know, but, yeah, I mean, that happens, right? Like, I hear that all the time on, like, how people are weighing things or prosecuting people on weight, and sometimes it's just like it's completely off.
Again, mistrust everybody. ... Law enforcement. Try to clean it up. I want to get Law Enforcement Against Prohibition on. I think they changed their name recently, but I would really love to have them come on and talk about all this stuff too. But yeah, if California is doing this, California should allow for growing. They're allowing for manufacture, plenty of other stuff. Shouldn't they also allow for growing mushrooms at home? I think the answer is yes. But let's see what California picks. Neither of us live there. It's got to be a little impartial, though. I'm a cheerleader for legal access.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, California. Best of luck. I hope it's a little calmer for you than it was in Oregon. It felt really hot when Oregon was going on, but I only imagine it's going to be really, really hot through this process with California.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Reminded me of some hippies I heard about. Actually, they were punk rockers, like 90s punk rockers, I think in Boston, either in Boston or Minneapolis. They got raided. They had a lot of cops show up to the house for a drug bust of some kind. Nobody got arrested. Nothing was found. There's a large glass vodka bottle in the fridge filled with liquid LSD, and they got by. And it's like, how is that relevant? I was thinking something around possession limits and, like, what constitutes what. The possession limit for LSD was pretty intense. Like I'm very okay. Like I would never need to carry more than that. What they listed, like never ever.
You remember what it was, or like ballpark?
Oh man, it's just insane possession limits. Like I'll try to pull it up.
I think I remember looking at some of that stuff too, and I was like, why would anybody ever like really need that out in public, unless you're like selling it or something at festivals?
Yeah. Yeah, right. Like, really it comes into when they're doing stuff at scale. So if your full-time job is running sessions in California and you're traveling up and down California, certain levels of possession would make sense. Or if you're trafficking, legally trafficking, perhaps you need more possession. But just bring a couple extra friends, guys, and you get real force multiplier there. I don't know. It's a weird one. I think people are kind of getting it a little too blown out of proportion here. I would. Oh, here it is. I think I found it. Yeah, DMT 2 grams. That's a shitload. Like 25 milligrams is a good dose, and they're saying 50 milligrams is a dose. It's a pretty big dose of DMT if you're doing one pull. Ibogaine 15 grams. They're saying standard dose is 500 milligrams. LSD, you can carry 50 hits of LSD. It's plenty. Psilocybin, 5-gram doses. That's pretty good. So like 2 grams of pure psilocybin or 4 ounces of plant or fungi. Like 4 ounces is a ton.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot of mushrooms.
Yeah. MDMA 4 grams. Yeah, that's plenty. And 4 grams of mescaline. That's a little low, but it's fine. It's healthy. Yeah, because you need about half gram or quarter gram to a half gram to really go for it. They're saying a standard mescaline dose is 250 milligrams. I've seen some stuff suggesting 500 milligrams is a standard dose of mescaline, but who knows? Anyway, these numbers are coming from the July 20 Lucid News article titled "Personal Possession Limits Added to California Decrim Bill to Move It Through Health Committee." So we have to make compromise. When in a democracy, we have to make compromise. And the sign of a great negotiation is that both sides are disappointed at the end. Ridiculous way to look at it, but a healthy one. And this is a hallmark of democracy. Can we make compromise? Can we get together and figure stuff out?
Yeah.
Another further question. You've heard of this concept of social contract? Like, we have a social contract with the government. It's like John Adams, like kind of like a founding fathers type discussion around like, why do I have any kind of relationship or obligation to the federal government? It's because of the social contract.
Right.
They provide X, we provide Y. What happens if they become in breach of this social contract, and what do we do about it?
How do you hold them accountable? Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, I don't know.
If you're a very wealthy person, totally. If you're not, probably not. And what do you do about it? Just a question. Just a little fodder in between the Friday episode and next Tuesday. Yeah. So we're at a little over an hour, Kyle. Is that right?
Yeah, a little over an hour. So yeah, I guess we'll start to wrap up here. Hopefully this was helpful. And just to emphasize, just kind of start asking these questions for yourself as these organizations are starting to come online. And it's something, Joe and I are always kind of checking in on ourselves of having hatred or fear towards this one thing, and then having to check in and question it and be like, what's going on here? Do we have all the facts? And I think it's important to have a healthy amount of skepticism with some of these things, but also to do the due diligence, try to get all the facts, and just ask these questions like how am I showing up to this, and what's really coming up for me? What am I bringing to the table when I'm approaching these topics? And just a lot of self-inquiry here.
Right, and I regularly admit being crazy paranoid, right? And it's helpful that I know that, because I know that I'm drawing links to things that I can't necessarily prove at all, right? Like, I think this, but it would be impossible for me to prove it, especially in court, right? So, what can you functionally prove really well enough that you could convince a judge, your mother, your best friend who's kind of like a hardcore atheist, or whatever it is? What evidence do you need? And I think a lot of this comes from my time in the UFO world. Like, nobody had great evidence, so it was always like, what does evidence look like? And right. Do you have enough evidence to think the compass is absolutely going to be the enemy? What is the worst case scenario that you're thinking about happening in the psychedelic space? I've heard a lot of people say the worst case scenario is what cannabis is today and what it might look like. I don't know. So, food for thought. All right, let's wrap it up. So, next round of Navigating Psychedelics kicks off in September. I think the date, I'm pulling it up right now, September 23 on Thursdays. There's 2 time slots, noon and 5 Mountain, 2 and 7 Eastern. It's appropriate for folks in Europe, the US, Canada, Mexico. I've had a number of South American people now. So join us. We'd love to have you. If you have questions, hit us up. We're probably going to start running some webinars to inform you all on this stuff and what it looks like pretty soon. So again, if you want to hit us up, support@psychedelicstoday.com with any questions. We'll get back to you for sure. We've also got our number up on the website, I think, or Facebook or something. So if you need us, hit us up. We'd love to have you join us. Anything else, Kyle?
Nope, that is it, I think, for today. I got some projects in the works, but we'll announce those as they unfold.
Do we ever? Yeah. Big announcements coming, folks, so hold on to your butts. All right, Kyle, thanks again, and we'll see everybody next time.